Welcome everyone to the Compass in the Eye of the Storm, and I am Mr. Snakemore. In this episode, I thought that we would talk about the military applications of information management. Firstly, how it has somewhat evolved historically, what has emerged, and a bit more about which way it seems to be going now. I guess you could say that there is a lot to talk about on this particular topic. There are in fact quite a lot of books written on this subject, but I'd say that there should be even more books, but for some reason they haven't been written. But I will try to straighten out some historic pieces, and we will, as I said, look both at the present and the future. We will not only talk about information management on this channel, but it is so incredibly central. Because information, as they say, is the new oil, and even that is an understatement. If you wonder what I mean by that, well, yes, then you can look at the coming episodes, and then I think you will understand what I mean. So, when it comes to these military applications, it looks like, yes, it looks, well, obviously a little bit different compared to this big tech and general information collection, although it still has relevance even in the military context. But we will look at this regarding cryptology and cryptography and how you, so to speak, want to communicate without someone being able to listen and how that has worked out. And mostly about how it really hasn't. And I am going to start by having us take a look at the historical perspective of this issue. A few years ago, I think it was 2020, it was rolled out in a quite large media coverage internationally. But mostly in the USA and perhaps especially in Switzerland, something that was then called the intelligence coup of the century.
50 years, governments around the world had trusted a single company to keep their diplomatic communications secret. The company was called Crypto AG. It built code-making machines for US troops during World War II, and then through the Cold War, the Swiss-based firm sold equipment to more than 120 countries. Some of it is still in use today. Its clients included Iran, India, Pakistan, and the Vatican.
But what none of its customers could ever have known was that Crypto AG was secretly co-owned by the CIA and West German intelligence. The spy agencies had rigged the company's devices so that they could easily break the codes that countries use to send their encrypted messages. It's an extraordinary story. It's just been...
So on September 22nd, 2020, Swedish television writes, International spy scandal revealed. Swedish-linked company allowed the CIA to spy on over 100 countries. An encryption company with Swedish connections shall for more than 50 years have passed intelligence information from at least 120 countries to the CIA. The operation has been called one of the best-kept secrets of the Cold War. The story starts with a Swedish inventor called Boris Hagelin. The Swedish inventor and entrepreneur Boris Hagelin escaped from Norway during the Second World War to the US and sold basic encryption machines to the US military. Hagelin moved on to Switzerland, where he started the company Crypto AG. The company came to work closely with the American intelligence community CIA and even later, the West German equivalent BND. Secret communication from all over the world. On Tuesday, the Washington Post revealed the German public service broadcaster ZDF and the Swiss public service company SRF. That Crypto AG for decades rigged their encryption products before they were sold on to governments all over the world. This made secret communications to become available to American and German intelligence services. The media houses have been given access to information in a secret CIA report and through numerous interviews with former employees. As Boris Hagelin's company Crypto AG grew, the CIA and BND bought the business. At the same time, staff who were not read in to the rigging of the machines came to suspect that something wasn't right. The encryptions were poorly done, and management didn't seem to bother to fix these faults in the machines. The company was liquidated in 2018. The German BND withdrew from the operation in the early 1990s. The Germans were worried that the scheme would be revealed, but the Americans continued until 2018 when the company's assets were sold to two other companies. One part was sold to a Swiss company which provides encryption services to the Swiss government. The second part, Crypto's international operations, was sold to Swedish entrepreneur Andreas Linde. When Andreas Linde was confronted with the information about the company's past, he seems very surprised. If what you say is true, I feel betrayed, and I think there will be a lot of employees who feel betrayed, as well as customers, he told the Washington Post. This is what the CIA learned using information from rigged encryption machines. The CIA, among other things, monitored Iran's mullahs during the 1979 hostage crisis, when several American embassy officials were held hostage in Tehran. It was possible to provide the UK with information about Argentina's military during the Falklands War, following the bloody history of the South American dictator's violence against opposition members at close range. They picked up that Libyan officials congratulated themselves after the country bombed a disco in Berlin in 1986, which led to the American bombing in Libya. The countries that bought these encryption machines was in Latin America: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. In Europe, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Turkey, Vatican City, and Yugoslavia. In Africa, Algeria, Angola, Egypt, Gabon, Ghana. Well, you get the picture. Hagelin's machines were everywhere. What they seem to miss, and I do say miss, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, they say it's the CIA that, so to speak, are eavesdropping here. And there's a lot of emphasis on that, this crypto AG. It started in Switzerland, this Boris Hagelin. He has Swedish connections, to put it mildly. Let's just say that there's some untold parts of this story, major parts that need to be told. Encrypted messages that are sent between two machines that have these backdoors in them can then be read in plain text, say by the CIA, for example. But in order for the CIA to read this plain text, they need to get the information somehow. It's not like the CIA has an office in between these two crypto machines where information travels through the CIA and then goes out to the next crypto machine. No, that is not the case, not at all. On the other hand, there is a telecom infrastructure that these cryptographic messages travel through. And then what happens is that you need to extract this encrypted message and then send the information for decryption. And sure, there is some information that is sent encrypted via radio signals, but this can also be intercepted. If they know how the machines work and they are fitted with backdoors, well, then you can decrypt it elsewhere, but you have to get the message itself first, and that happens most of the time through the telecom infrastructure, and the media misses this completely. And that's not something to be very surprised about, really. But if we go back a bit then, and look at the case of this Boris Hagelin and his Swedish connections, as the media so nicely puts it. How did it happen when Boris Hagelin started Crypto AG, or Cryptograph, as it was originally called? So it was originally a Swedish company that was started sometime in 1917 by a man called Arvid Damm. Arvid Damm had a brother who was a mathematician, and Arvid Damm himself, he was an engineer. They started a company together to produce crypto machines. And business was bad. Things were so bad that they needed help. Enter a person called Olof Gildin, a man who does not have insignificant military connections, one might say. And he helped and get funding, or financiers. He facilitated contact with a man called Emanuel Nobel. Emanuel Nobel of the prominent Nobel family was probably in a bit of a bind. It didn't go so well for the Nobel family or the Nobel Brothers company in Russia that were involved in oil. It was a bit bumpy, to say the least. Alfred Nobel and Ludwig Nobel died in the late 19th century, and then it was only Emanuel Nobel left. And he probably didn't have much choice in the matter other than to provide funding for Cryptograph, for reasons that we won't go into now. And once the funding was secured, another man also enters the company. A man called Wilhelm Hagelin, who is Boris Hagelin's father. Wilhelm Hagelin had worked for the Nobel brothers in Russia before their company was run out of business, and the Nobel brothers ended up dead. Wilhelm Hagelin comes into Cryptograph and puts his son in charge of monitoring the finances of the company, as they called it. This was in the beginning of the 1920s. Boris Hagelin came directly from ASIA, which is the current company ABB, which in turn is also an Investor AB-controlled company. Investor AB also controls Ericsson. And all of a sudden, cryptograph's business picks up rapidly. They quickly got an order from France. In the early 30s, France wanted to buy around 5,000 cryptography machines and for some reason decided on Cryptograph, a very small company at the time. The order was so large that Cryptograph decided to leave the manufacturing of the machines over to Ericsson. So just by some random chance, Ericsson ended up manufacturing the cryptographic machines that were delivered to France. So when World War II came around, the French had these machines in active service. And Boris Hagelin, he received the French Legion of Honor for it. Boris Hagelin also tried to sell his encryption machines to the NSA over in the US. It did not go very well at first. It was not until the war had already been going on for a while that NSA thought that, yes, why don't we test some machines? Towards the end of the Second World War, an agreement with the NSA was made to deliver massive amounts of crypto machines. And these crypto machines were spread all over the world, basically, to allies. And the same machines also found their way into the hands of non-allied states. And there are in fact lots of oddities during this period when it comes to interception of encrypted traffic. Among other things, when Germany occupied Norway, they rented Swedish telephone lines. Well, wasn't that nice of Sweden?
När tyskarna 1940 kräver att få transitera trupper genom Sverige till det ockuperade Norge, det är den stora förnedrande eftergiften för Sverige. Så kommer de med ett annat krav som inte blir allmänt känt, och det är att de ska få skicka telegramtrafik till och från sina militära styrkor i Norge via de svenska kablarna. Och varför vill de göra det? Jo, tyskarna är ju medvetna om att de allierade lyssnar på det som går i luften, i etern. Så ett säkrare sätt att kommunicera med styrkorna i Norge, det är att gå via svensk kabel.
Och det gick Sverige med på?
Och Sverige gick med på det här. Och tyskarna var ganska nöjda, för de hade ett kryptosystem, en maskin som hette Geheimschreiber. Alltså hemlig skrivare kan man säga. Som de litade fullständigt på. Som förvandlade klartexten till abrakadabra. Och svenskarna började tappa av den här trafiken, det här abrakadabrat. Man kopplade in sig helt enkelt på de här ledningarna, och så hade man teleprintrar. Och så var det ett matematiskt geni, en professor i Uppsala, som fick en bunt av de här uppfångade materialet, och så sätter han sig och funderar, och han använder sig av 3 verktyg. Han har ett block framför sig, han har en penna och han har sitt eget huvud. Och på 2 veckor så har han kommit på att det finns en blotta i det här obrytbara kryptosystemet. Därför de gör ett litet fel i överföringen. Och tack vare det där felet så lyckas svenskarna komma på hur de ska få ut klartexten. Så det är alltså någonting på 30 000 telegram under ett antal års tid som svenskarna sitter och läser i klartext.
The official story is something like this. Swedish military intelligence could intercept the German traffic going to Norway via Sweden. And the German crypto machine, the G machine as it is called, which was the encryption device used by the Germans, it was manufactured by Siemens, not by Ericsson, but by Siemens. The fact that Investor AB, that controls Ericsson, had big financial stakes in IG Farben during the war, and how Siemens and Ericsson have had a steady relationship since the late 1800s, we can save for another time. But as the official story goes on how this crypto was cracked is that there is a Swedish mathematician who worked at the Swedish radio agency, the FRA, whose name was Arne Borling. The story is that Arne Borling sat down in his summer cottage for 2 weeks with paper and pencil and managed to crack the German G machine's crypto. Then the Swedes could read all the German encrypted messages in plain text. This type of explanation was considered good enough back then. It's a bit unclear whether it still is. Paper and pencil in the summer cottage for 2 weeks. and he had cracked the crypto used by the Germans. I'm not saying it's a lie, but do you find it plausible? When you read this book, Guide to the Spies Intelligence Services Sweden, that lots of prominent gentlemen have authored, including Wilhelm Agrell, then you are, well, one is a little bit surprised when it says here that Arne Börling, after having been in the summer cottage, of course, with paper and pencil, gave instructions to the company LM Ericsson how to build copies of the G-Writer's crypto parts. So it became possible to receive the messages sent with G machines. The copies included both the 10 code wheels and the phone plugs. So it was Ericsson that produced a Swedish G machine so they could eavesdrop on the Germans, according to Börling's instruction then, of course. And they could also during the Finnish Winter War, when Sweden helped Finland, because as the saying goes, Finland's sake is our sake, Sweden could help Finland to intercept Russian encrypted traffic. And Arne Börling was there again. I don't know if he had his summer cottage with him, but he apparently managed to crack the crypto that the Russians used as well. This meant that Finland could get early warnings about when they would bomb them and so on, and of course, I guess that was a nice thing. But whether this paper and pencil thing is really true, or if it's some other party involved all the time in the background, I have a funny feeling that the future will prove the past. What's a bit interesting is that the Russian crypto devices used were in fact copies of Boris Hegelin's machine. Boris Hegelin, he visited the Russian embassy just before the Second World War because the Russians wanted to buy 2 B211 units from Hegelin, which is the same crypto equipment that he had sold to France. Russia wanted to buy these, and according to cryptomuseum.com, if you read a bit about this, Hegelin was forced by Swedish authorities to sell these 2 machines to Russia. And as one reads on, Boris was at the Russian embassy and demonstrated his machines. And then they had identical copies made of this machine. And then you can ask yourself if there were back doors in the Hegelin machines even before the CIA bought the company, at least on paper. And if there were back doors in the machine they had sold to France, and then they copied that machine and sold it to Russia, but under a different name. It was in Russia's case called K37, but it was a copy of the B211, the same machine that had been sold to France. This begs the question, was Arne Börling a mathematical genius? Maybe he was, but was he a wizard of cryptology? Or is this because they had the machines rigged by the minute? And maybe it's always the same entity in the middle controlling information on both sides. After all, who controls the telecom infrastructure in 184 countries? And also manufactured these machines? It could very well be. I'm not saying that it is. But the thought has occurred to me once or twice, I must admit. But of course, maybe it's more likely that a lonely mathematician sits down in the summer cottage with paper and pencil for a few days and does what no one else has been able to do, rather than rigging the machines from the beginning and making sure to have control of the production. Now, the question is not what I think, the question is what you think. Research this for yourselves and draw your own conclusions. And then you have to remember, when it emerged that there were back doors in the Hegelin machines, they were very careful to point out that the company was Swiss, not Swedish, and that it was the CIA and the German intelligence service. They're completely missing the whole of the Second World War, always the same companies and the same interests behind the scenes. Knowing the links between Ericsson's, I will not say representatives, but the interests who controlled Ericsson during this time, the people at the very top, their relationship with the man who became the first CIA director. If you know this, then you will think that this looks even more strange. But this is how it's always been done. But in the 70s, the CIA had to step in front and take ownership of Crypto AG. And what happened to Boris Hegelin's son? He was supposed to take over the company from his father, but didn't want to. He accidentally killed himself in a car accident, and that was very unfortunate. just as the CIA took over the company. Weird. It would probably take a lot of episodes just to drill down into all aspects of what happened during, well, the earlier half of the 20th century, the Second World War, and so on, to turn every stone on these issues to be able to provide a slightly clearer picture. But the risk is that it will just get messy, so why don't we leave it with this thought? Was the Hagelin machines rigged right from the start? Was Ericsson involved in the background? Has this always been about control of information, always making sure you have the informational advantage? We can leave ourselves with that question. However, we can clearly state that some things we know for sure. We know that information management is the most important part of modern warfare. We know that whoever controls the telecom infrastructure is a very strong force in modern warfare. End of story. And we know that it is Ericsson that controls the telecom infrastructure in 184 countries. We know that cryptography is extremely important in the military applications of information management. And we know that Hagelin's machines had backdoors, at least from the 70s and onwards. I say at least because we know that for sure. Regarding the rest, we can strongly suspect and speculate. With quite high reliability, I would still say. But that's for everyone to judge, of course. Something else we know as a consequence of knowing what we know is that in order to counteract someone who controls the telecom infrastructure in basically every country, you need to create your own informational advantage somehow. How do you get around this problem? And of course, there are lots of ways that you can try to counteract. You can try to forcibly take control. And someone might already have done that, I would say. But just to make sure, you must also have your own infrastructure to communicate and manage information within. And then I think about space, and I think about satellites. I think about SpaceX, and I'm thinking about Starlink as well. I think about Elon Musk. I'm also wondering about the new branch of the military that Donald Trump launched called Space Force. Space Force, which was basically ridiculed in the media when Trump announced that he was starting something called Space Force. And that's really the military part of the space program in the USA, and they've done some pretty special things over time. On one hand, I would say that they've done some funny things as well. Someone has obviously funded a TV series on Netflix called Space Force, just to make fun of, and ridicule it. And then you can ask yourself, who benefits from seeing this as something worth making fun of and not as a threat? We're going to look at a clip from this series and see if... well, do you think it looks scary, this Space Force?
The president is creating a new branch
In the United States military.
Space Force, which Mark will run.
I don't.
It has always been my dream to start something from the ground up. But space is hard.
May I suggest that become the new Space Force motto?
Shit.
I guess I have my own thoughts about why this series came out, and who is likely to be behind it. In order to counteract a power structure that controls the management of information in some way, and someone who controls it on such a global level, well, then you have to be a little sneaky with your countermeasures. So the true meaning of Space Force, and what it actually means, probably wasn't obvious until later. Because what did they do quite recently on the 15th of August 2022? On that day, the US military gave over control of all military satellites to Space Force. This could of course just be a coincidence like so many other things, or someone is engaged in some kind of counteraction, and that there's some kind of, I wouldn't really say it is so damn quiet, but a silent war in the background which is about information control might be in progress. But this is pure speculation, of course. When we now leave the military application of information management, a little bit behind us, and we'll consider it as pretty much settled at the moment, then in the next episode we will look a little more at public opinion formation. How does it work? And what is public opinion formation really? And what role does the media play in this war for our thoughts and minds? And I'm not talking about some weird form of mind control or anything like that. I'm talking about the information we get through the media. How does it affect our way of thinking, our way of acting, our way of voting, our confidence in the system as such? I thought we would talk a bit about that next time. It will be interesting, I think. Thank you very much again for all the nice comments, all the likes, all the shares, and for following this channel. Thank you again for watching and listening. As usual, I hope that it has given you something to think about. Thank you all, and I hope to see you in the future. See you soon. Bye.